The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, like blood left to stew in the oppressive heat of the jungle. Lucas Grant's vision swam as he tried to focus. His body sprawled awkwardly on the ground. His head throbbed, each beat in time with the distant sound of something heavy. Boots? No, the rhythm was too uneven, the weight too deliberate, like paws pressing into the loamy soil. He didn't dare open his eyes fully, though the slivers of light leaking through his lashes told him it was no longer night. How long had he been unconscious? Hours? Days? His breath hitched, and the sound felt thunderous in the silence. No, not silence. A rustling movement, a whisper of fabric and leaves brushing together, not far from him. Close. Too close. Lucas resisted the urge to bolt upright. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something, but his limbs felt like lead, his muscles bound by the crushing gravity of the planet. He shifted his hand an inch through the dirt, hoping for the familiar cold weight of his sidearm. Nothing. Only bare earth, slick with morning dew. He blinked his eyes open, just enough to make sense of his surroundings. His breath hitched again. The first thing he saw wasn't the trees, their glowing veins of amber sap weaving an eerie tapestry above. It wasn't even the darkened outline of his teammates' mangled forms, lying limp in the distance like discarded dolls. It was them. Figures crouched among the shadows, their forms barely human, but undeniably alive. Their skin gleamed a deep obsidian, like polished stone under the light of two pale suns. Armor, if you could call it that, was strapped to their limbs, shards of bone and metal woven into a lattice of protection that looked as savage as it was functional. The figures didn't move at first, their stillness unnatural, predatory. They were watching him, studying. One of them tilted her head, her eyes catching the light, a flash of crimson in the gloom. Lucas swallowed, his throat dry as ash. He knew without a doubt that he shouldn't be alive. The expedition had been routine, or at least it had seemed routine. A planetary survey, a team of 9 scientists, 2 ex-Marines for security, and Lucas, their communications officer, sent to map an uncharted sector of the galaxy. Eleron's reports marked it as low risk, a jungle world with no signs of advanced life. No ruins, no settlements, just endless stretches of untamed wilderness. But the signs had been there, the warning they'd ignored. The first was the silence, not the absence of sound. Eleron had plenty of that. Wind rustling through trees, the chirp of insect-like creatures, the hum of some bioluminescent moss. But there were no predators, no territorial growls, no cries of distant hunters. It was the kind of silence that made the hair on your neck rise. The second was the markings. Deep gashes on the trunks of trees, spiraling patterns carved with precision that no natural force could create. When Dr. Layton had leaned in close to examine them, she'd laughed nervously, brushing it off as the work of some large animal. And then the attack. It had come from nowhere. One moment they were trudging through thick foliage, sweating and swatting at airborne pests. The next, the world erupted into chaos. Screams, a blur of motion, shapes leaping from the canopy, impossibly fast, wielding weapons that glinted in the dim light. Lucas barely remembered how he'd survived. He hadn't fought. He hadn't even seen their faces clearly. All he knew was that when the world stopped spinning and the screams faded into an awful, heavy quiet, he was alone, or so he'd thought. The rustling grew louder, snapping Lucas back to the present. One of the figures stepped forward, breaking from the pack. She was taller than him, easily over 6 feet, and moved with a grace that made her towering frame even more intimidating. Her face was partially obscured by what looked like a carved bone mask, its jagged edges resembling the maw of some long-extinct predator. She knelt beside him, and Lucas fought the urge to recoil. Her eyes met his, a striking red, not glowing, but alive with an intensity that sent a chill through his core. She tilted her head again, almost curiously, before speaking in a language that sounded like knives scraping against stone. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A question. His mouth was dry, his voice barely a rasp. I don't... The woman barked a command, and the others stirred, circling closer. Lucas's heart thundered in his chest. He was surrounded now. 10, no, 12 of them, their stances rigid but poised to strike at any moment. One of them prodded him with the butt of her weapon, a staff tipped with jagged blades. Lucas flinched, biting back a cry of pain. The leader raised a hand, and the others fell silent again. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing some unspoken decision. Finally, she turned and barked another command. 2 warriors moved forward, grabbing Lucas by his arms and hauling him to his feet. His legs buckled beneath him, but they held him steady, their grip unyielding. "Wait," he croaked. "What are you—" The words died in his throat as they began dragging him deeper into the jungle. He twisted, trying to catch a glimpse of where they were taking him, but the dense foliage swallowed all hints of direction. As they moved, Lucas caught fragments of their surroundings, the alien carvings etched into the trees, the faint glow of bioluminescence seeping from the ground like blood from a wound. Every detail screamed of something ancient, something deliberately hidden. And then he saw it. Through the dense underbrush, a massive structure loomed ahead, a fortress of sorts, built into the gnarled trunks of colossal trees. Its architecture was jagged, primal, and yet hauntingly precise. Fires burned in scattered pits, their light casting eerie shadows on the towering walls. Lucas's captors marched him through a gate formed from interlocking bones, their edges sharpened into deadly points. The air grew heavier, and Lucas felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes boring into him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew 2 things for certain. He was not meant to leave this place alive, and these women, these warriors, were far more than just hunters. They were protectors of something, something hidden, something worth killing for. The air inside the compound was thick, oppressive. Lucas's head swam with dizziness as the warriors shoved him into a narrow stone cell, its walls rough-hewn and covered with strange symbols that flickered like half-remembered dreams. The flickering light came from torches, set at irregular intervals, their flame a deep blue, like the dying remnants of a star. He slumped against the cold wall, his breath ragged as the harsh hands of his captors released him. He barely registered the clinking sound of chains falling to the stone floor until a pair of warriors moved to stand guard just outside. Their expressions, cold and unreadable behind their bone masks, said more than words ever could. Lucas closed his eyes, his mind reeling. The jungle outside had swallowed his crew in a matter of minutes. One moment, they were marching through the dense foliage, eager to explore a new world. The next, they were slaughtered without mercy. He was the last man standing, though he had no idea why they had spared him. It made no sense. He wasn't important. He was a comms officer, a tech guy, not a fighter or a leader. And yet, here he was, alive. And that was enough to make him a curiosity, a dangerous curiosity. The leader, the woman with the crimson eyes, appeared again, stepping into the dim light of the cell. She loomed in the doorway, her silhouette imposing, her presence like an omen. Her warriors flanked her, waiting for something. An order, perhaps. Or maybe for the moment to arrive when they could execute him. But it didn't come. She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that sent a shiver crawling up his spine. Lucas met her gaze, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to look away. Those eyes were not like any humans. They burned with something primal, something ancient. He wasn't sure if he feared them more for what they revealed or for what they hid. "You speak," she said, in a voice that was as sharp as the curved blade strapped to her hip. Her accent was harsh, the words alien, yet there was an odd rhythm to them. He could almost understand them, like a familiar song sung in a foreign tongue. Lucas opened his mouth, but the words came out hoarse. "I don't understand." She stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under her weight, her expression unreadable. A cold breeze stirred as she reached down and lifted his chin with a gloved finger, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You will understand," she said, her tone as final as the blade she wielded. "In time." And then she was gone, leaving him alone in the cell, once more. The days passed slowly, like the ebbing of the tide, each one marked by the creeping anxiety in Lucas's gut. Every time the warriors came to him, it was with the same silent purpose: test him, study him, break him. He had no idea what they wanted from him, but their eyes never wavered. Their motions were precise, controlled, and terrifying in their calmness. At times, they threw food into his cell, but it was never enough to satisfy his hunger. He ate when he could, though it didn't matter. His body wasn't hungry for food, it was hungry for answers. And yet he couldn't bring himself to trust the answers that danced on the edge of his thoughts. The trials continued. At first, they made him run. Through the compound, across uneven ground, through tight passages and open courtyards where the air felt like it might crush him. Each time he stumbled, they were there, their sharp eyes on him, their presence relentless. If he slowed, they would shout orders at him in their language, urging him to push harder, faster. But what unsettled him more than the physical exhaustion was the way the warriors observed him. Their eyes never left him, never showed a flicker of emotion, only quiet curiosity. It was as if they were studying something far beyond his capabilities, as if his survival was no accident. One day, after a grueling series of exercises designed to break him, the leader appeared once more. She had no mask this time. Her face was sharp, regal, and framed by thick black hair that flowed like ink down her back. There was something unsettling about the symmetry of her features, like a work of art that was too perfect to be real. "Your will is strong," she said, the words heavy, as if testing them on her tongue. "But it is not enough." Lucas glared at her, the anger bubbling inside him like a slow-burning fire. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, voice cracking. "Why am I still alive? Why didn't you just kill me like you did to the others?" Her expression remained impassive. She stepped closer, so close that the heat of her presence enveloped him. For a moment, Lucas thought she might strike, but instead, she reached out and touched his chest with the back of her hand. "The question is not why you are alive," she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The question is why you are here." Her words hung in the air, vibrating with a hidden meaning. Lucas felt the weight of them pressing down on his chest. That night, after the trials had ended, and he was left alone in his cell again, the world outside seemed to shift. It was subtle at first, a low hum in the air that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The usual sounds of the jungle, chirping, rustling, the odd growl of some distant predator, were gone. In their place was a silence so absolute it felt suffocating. Lucas stood up, heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why, but something told him this was the moment everything would change. A soft footfall behind him made him freeze, a whisper of movement. Without thinking, he turned, only to find himself staring directly into the face of Jera. Her crimson eyes glowed in the dark like twin embers, and the lines of her jaw were tight, as if she were wrestling with something. "Come with me," she said, her voice low, barely more than a breath. Lucas hesitated, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, but he didn't dare speak. There was something different about her tonight, an urgency, a need for him to follow. He nodded slowly, then stepped forward. She turned, leading him out of the cell without a word. For a moment, he felt the weight of every pair of eyes watching him as he passed. The warriors were everywhere, silent as the shadows, but none made a move to stop him. He followed Jera deeper into the compound, toward the massive structure that loomed at the center of it all. The very air seemed to change as they approached it, thicker, more oppressive. A sense of foreboding hung over them, and yet Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was waiting for them inside was far darker than anything he had encountered so far. And then, just as they reached the entrance, Jera turned to him, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. "We are not alone," she said. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure what she meant, but in that moment, he realized the truth. His survival had only just begun. The deep shadows of the compound seemed to stretch longer as Lucas followed Jera through the darkened corridors. Her footsteps were nearly silent, though the tension in the air grew with each step. There was something unsettling about the way she moved, purposeful, yet fluid, as if the earth itself responded to her presence. She didn't look back, but Lucas could feel the weight of her gaze on him, like the flicker of flames waiting to ignite. "Where are we going?" Lucas finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse from days of uncertainty. Jera didn't answer immediately. Instead, her gaze flickered to the entrance of a large chamber ahead, a place Lucas had never seen before. The stone archway was adorned with intricate carvings, symbols that were entirely unfamiliar to him. He had no way of knowing their meaning, but the craftsmanship was undeniably exquisite, almost otherworldly. "There are things you don't understand," Jera said, her voice low and heavy like the weight of 1,000 years of history. "Things that have kept this tribe in the dark, but they will understand soon enough. You are the one who will show them." Her words held more than a suggestion. They were a command. But the conviction in her tone stirred something deep in Lucas, a mix of fear and fascination. He had come here as an outsider, someone with no place in this brutal world, yet somehow he was becoming a central figure in a battle he couldn't yet comprehend. Jera stopped in front of the chamber, turning to face him at last. Her eyes, those crimson pools, seemed to burn with an intensity that unnerved him. The mask of control she had worn all this time had slipped, revealing something raw and unspoken. "I have seen the future," she murmured, almost to herself. "And you are not just a prisoner. You are something more. A bridge, a key to breaking this cycle." Before Lucas could process her words, she pushed the heavy stone door open with a force that left him breathless. The air inside the chamber was thick with the scent of incense, and the walls were lined with strange artifacts, relics of a time long past. But the most striking thing about the room was the centerpiece, a large spherical device, its surface covered in intricate runes that seemed to shimmer with a life of their own. Jera stepped forward, her fingers brushing over the runes as she muttered something in a language that sent chills crawling up Lucas's spine. "What is this?" Lucas asked, his heart racing as he took a step closer, captivated by the sight before him. "This," Jera said, turning to face him with a fierce intensity, "is the key to everything." She paused, allowing the words to sink in. "It is what binds the Zerali to the land, to the blood, to the customs we are born with. It is what has kept us isolated, chained to an endless cycle of war." Lucas's confusion deepened. "But how does this involve me?" Jera met his gaze, her eyes hardening. "Because this is not just a relic, it is a prison that holds something darker than any of us could imagine." Before Lucas could ask another question, the ground beneath them trembled, a deep vibration that made the stone walls groan. A sudden, cold gust of wind swept through the chamber, snuffing out the torches one by one. Jera's expression shifted from one of resolve to one of urgency. "They are here," she whispered. Lucas didn't need to ask who they were. He had seen the way the warriors had moved when the tremors started. He had heard the quiet, whispered warnings that something was coming, something beyond their control. He turned to face Jera, his pulse quickening. "What's happening?" Her gaze hardened, and for the first time since he'd met her, Lucas saw fear in her eyes. "The enemy is closer than we thought. The things I've kept hidden, the truth of why you're still alive, will come to light. We've been fools to believe this place was safe." And then, as if to confirm her words, the door to the chamber slammed shut with a deafening crack. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to draw closer with each passing second. Jera spun toward the door, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of the curved blade at her side. Lucas followed her lead, his body on high alert. The air had changed again, thick with a sense of impending doom. Whatever was coming, it was close, and it was relentless. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the footsteps had been. The tension in the air was almost tangible. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when everything would fracture into chaos. And then it came. A violent crash shook the walls of the chamber, followed by the unmistakable sound of alien shrieks, savage, primal, full of fury. Lucas's heart slammed in his chest as he tried to make sense of the noise, but the images were too fast, too distorted in his mind. Something was breaking through, something that had been hidden until now. "Move!" Jera commanded, her voice a sharp crack in the stillness. Before Lucas could react, Jera grabbed him by the arm and hauled him toward the far corner of the chamber, pushing him behind a large pillar of stone. The echoes of battle reverberated through the compound, growing louder by the second. He could hear the clash of metal on metal, the screams of the warriors, and beneath it all the deep, guttural growls of something far worse than anything he had seen so far. "What is happening?" Lucas demanded, his heart thudding in his chest as he crouched down beside her. "They are here. The invaders, the ones who follow the false gods," Jera spat, her voice filled with venom. "The ones who seek to destroy us." "But how did they get in? How do they know about us?" Jera's eyes burned with a fierce anger, a fire that would not be extinguished. "Because of you." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "Me?" "Yes. Your ship, your technology. It's drawn them to us. They've been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike." Lucas's mind raced, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a vice. He had no idea how this could have happened. His crew had been so careful, so methodical in their exploration. They hadn't sent out any signals. They hadn't contacted anyone. Yet here they were, under attack. Suddenly, the pillar shook violently, and a cloud of dust filled the air. Lucas heard something move in the shadows, something too large and too fast to be a human warrior. He instinctively reached for the weapon at his side, an old sidearm left behind by the crew. His hands were shaking, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. "Get ready," Jera said, her voice steady. "This will be a fight to the death." And with that, the door to the chamber burst open, revealing a nightmare of alien horrors. Creatures unlike anything Lucas had ever seen. Twisted, armored beasts, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, their jaws dripping with saliva as they stalked toward them. The battle for survival had begun. The sound of battle raged around Lucas, a cacophony of metal and alien screeches that seemed to pierce through the very air. His body was on autopilot, adrenaline surging through his veins, heart hammering in his chest as the Zerali warriors fought with everything they had. Jera was a blur of motion beside him, her blade a deadly extension of herself, cutting through the invaders with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. But Lucas's mind wasn't on the violence surrounding them. It was on the fragments of Jera's words from moments before. "Because of you." The weight of those words settled over him like a cloud, heavy and suffocating. He had thought his arrival here was an accident, a mistake in the grand scheme of things. Yet somehow, the very presence of his ship, his technology, had drawn this invasion to their doorstep. The question gnawed at him. What had he really brought to this world? He forced himself to focus, raising his weapon and firing, his aim shaky but true. A creature lunged toward him, its grotesque face contorted in a vicious snarl, and he barely had time to react before Jera's sword cleaved through its chest. She moved without hesitation, the movement so fluid it was like watching a predator in its element. "Stay close," Jera growled, her voice sharp as she whipped her blade in a wide arc, severing the head of another invader. "If you're going to survive this, you need to fight." Lucas's throat went dry as he caught sight of something more disturbing than the invaders themselves. In the chaos, Jera's tribe, the Zerali, were breaking apart. Some of the warriors fought fiercely, but others, those loyal to the old ways, those who feared change, were retreating, abandoning the battle, their backs turned as the invaders flooded into the compound. "Jera!" Lucas shouted over the din, his voice cracking with urgency. "Your warriors, your people, they're abandoning the fight." Jera's eyes flicked to him, a flicker of frustration crossing her face before she quickly suppressed it. "We don't have time for questions," she snapped, parrying a blow from a creature with a weapon forged from bone. "They've been preparing for this moment. The ones who follow the false gods, they know the Zerali better than we know ourselves. The old ways are broken, Lucas. We either adapt or we die." The words hit him harder than the roar of the invaders' weapons. The old ways? Was this why Jera had been so determined to change the tribe's path? Was this battle part of a much larger struggle, one that he couldn't even begin to understand? In that moment, a chilling realization gripped him. Jera wasn't just fighting for her people, she was fighting for the future of everything she had known. But the question remained, what future? The old ways had failed them. But had Jera's vision been enough to save them from the monsters at their gates? Another crash shook the chamber, sending vibrations through the floor beneath his feet. Lucas barely managed to keep his balance, glancing over to see a massive creature, the leader of the invaders, emerge from the shadows, its eyes burning with an unnatural cold fire. Jera's face darkened as she saw the creature. "It's him," she whispered, her voice like a curse. "Tirzal, the one who commands them." "Who is he?" Lucas asked, his voice sharp, adrenaline flooding his bloodstream as the reality of their situation sank in. This wasn't just a random attack. This was deliberate, planned, and they were outmatched. "He's the one who destroyed my tribe once before," Jera said through gritted teeth. "Long ago, before the bloodlines were broken, before my father led the tribe into exile. Tirzal was the one who betrayed us, the one who allied with the false gods." Tirzal's gaze turned to them, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. The sight of it sent a chill through Lucas, something primal and unsettling stirring within him. There was no love lost between Jera and this creature, and Lucas could sense it. The deep, bitter hatred that ran between them, a wound that had festered for far too long. Jera didn't hesitate. With a battle cry that sent shockwaves through the air, she surged forward, her blade flashing like a comet in the dark, aimed directly for Tirzal's chest. But he was faster, his massive form shifting in a blur as he parried her strike with a weapon made of living, pulsating energy, a blade of darkness that seemed to hum with malice. "Foolish girl," Tirzal growled, his voice a guttural rasp that echoed through the chamber. "Do you think your petty tribe can stop what is coming? You are nothing. Your people are nothing." Jera's eyes burned with fury as she lunged again, her movements swift and precise. But Lucas saw it, the weakness in her eyes, the uncertainty that flickered beneath the rage. She wasn't fighting just for survival. She was fighting for her beliefs, for her tribe, for the future she had so desperately tried to build. But Tirzal was a symbol of everything that stood in her way. With a roar, Jera pushed him back, but the invader king didn't retreat. Instead, he swung his weapon downward, aiming for her chest. Lucas couldn't think. He acted on instinct. With a yell, he threw himself at Tirzal, using the sidearm in his hands to fire directly at the invader's head. The blast struck, but only grazed his helmet, sending a burst of energy through the air. It wasn't enough. "Lucas!" Jera shouted as Tirzal turned to face him, his anger burning hot. "Get out of here! This is my fight!" But Lucas couldn't leave. Not now. He was too far in. In a desperate move, he grabbed the fallen weapon of a nearby invader, a long, jagged blade covered in a dark, viscous substance that seemed to burn the air. Without thinking, he charged again, feeling the weight of every choice pressing down on him. Tirzal turned just in time to meet him, their weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. But as the enemy king staggered backward, Lucas realized something. The invaders weren't just here for the tribe. They were here for Jera, for her power, for the key to the future. And he, Lucas, was the unwitting pawn in their game. Jera's voice cut through the chaos again. "You have to choose, Lucas. Fight for what's left of us, or let us all die. He had no answer. Only the cold, bitter truth. There was no way out, not without sacrifice. Lucas faced the enemy king, ready to fight. But the real question was not whether he would survive, but what he would lose in the process. And in that moment, as Tirzal advanced, the weight of the tribe's future, Jera's future, rested on his shoulders. The next move would decide everything. The battlefield lay in ruins, a quiet, haunting stillness settling over the once bustling compound. The scent of scorched metal and the faint stench of alien blood clung to the air, but the cries of battle had long since faded. The warriors who remained were either scattered, retreating into the shadows, or tending to their fallen. And amidst the devastation, Lucas stood still, the weight of everything pressing upon him like a vice. Jera's voice broke through the silence, distant yet steady. "Lucas." He turned, the harsh winds whipping through his hair, but there she was, standing like a specter, as much a part of this world now as the shattered remnants of her people's once proud legacy. Her face was streaked with blood and dirt, her body covered in the wear of battle. But her eyes, those sharp, burning eyes, had softened. She was not just the leader of the Zerali anymore. She was someone else entirely. Someone who had lost everything and yet, somehow, found the will to keep fighting. "How many?" Lucas asked, his voice hoarse from the turmoil that had consumed him over the past hours. His body ached in ways he never thought possible, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. Jera's gaze faltered, her shoulders slumping for the briefest moment before she steadied herself. "Too many." Her tone was laced with a sorrow that cut deeper than any blade. "But we're still here. We're still standing." He nodded, understanding her words without needing to hear them. The Zerali had fought fiercely, but Tirzal's forces had been overwhelming, and now there was nothing left to do but count the costs. Except for one thing. "Where is he?" Lucas asked, his throat tight with an unspoken dread. He didn't need to elaborate. Jera knew exactly who he meant. Her expression hardened, but there was no anger in it, only the grim reality of the choices they had made. "He's gone." The weight of Tirzal's death hung heavy between them. Lucas had struck the final blow, his blade buried deep into the Invader King's chest after a brutal, desperate clash. It had been a victory, but it had come at a cost. Tirzal's forces had retreated, but the damage had been done, and now as the leader of the Zerali, Jera would be left to rebuild, to gather the scattered pieces of her broken people. "You killed him," Jera continued, her voice barely a whisper. "But his followers will not forgive you. They never forgive." She stepped forward, her eyes flicking to the distance, to the horizon that lay beyond the ruins. "We're not safe. Not yet." Lucas glanced at her, his heart heavy with the knowledge that for all their struggles the battle wasn't truly over. Tirzal might be dead, but his legacy, his dark influence, still lingered in the corners of this world. The war was only beginning, and Jera, brave, resolute Jera, would have to lead her people into a future that was as uncertain as the blood-red sky above them. But as she stood there, facing the remnants of her shattered world, Lucas saw something in her he hadn't noticed before, something that transcended the warrior, the leader, the queen in the making. It was a glimmer of hope, a flicker of something that was more than just survival. She was a woman who had fought for something greater than herself, and now, despite everything, she wasn't ready to let it go. "I won't let them win," Jera said, almost to herself. Her eyes met Lucas's, and for the first time, there was no wall between them, no distance. It was as if she was revealing her true self to him, vulnerable, raw, and human. "We'll rebuild, together." A strange calm washed over him. Despite the chaos, despite the looming threats, there was a sense of purpose in her words. In that moment, Lucas realized something. This was his choice now, too. He wasn't just a passerby in her world anymore. He had become part of it, woven into the fabric of her fight, her destiny. "How?" Lucas asked, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to overtake him. "How do we start?" Jera's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, a smile filled with both sorrow and hope. "One step at a time. First, we gather what's left. Then we rebuild. And we make sure that Tirzal's influence never takes root here again. We start with the truth." Lucas nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of her words. The truth had been buried beneath lies and betrayals for far too long, but the truth, however painful, was the only thing that would set them free. As the last of the sun's rays dipped beneath the horizon, casting the world in shades of red and gold, Jera turned to face the distance. She stood taller now, no longer the hunted, but the hunter. She had lost much, but she had gained something too, a sense of direction, of purpose. And with that, she was no longer just the leader of a fallen tribe, she was the leader of a new beginning. "Jera," Lucas said, stepping closer. The words felt foreign, but necessary. "Whatever happens next, I'll stand with you. I've made my choice." For a long moment, Jera didn't respond. She merely stood there, the wind pulling at her hair, the weight of her decisions evident in the silent space between them. Then, with a soft exhale, she spoke. "Good," she said, her voice stronger now. "Because we're going to need all the help we can get." The stars were already beginning to emerge, pinpricks of light against the endless black, as if to remind them that the universe, despite everything, continued on, indifferent to the struggles of one world. But for Lucas and Jera, the fight was just beginning. They had won one battle, but many more lay ahead. The question now was not whether they would survive, but whether they could shape the future they wanted, or whether it would be shaped for them. And as they stood there together at the edge of a new dawn, Lucas realized one thing for certain. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. But they would face it, side by side. They would fight for the truth, for the future, and for the people they had left behind. And in that fight, maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to rebuild, to heal the wounds that ran deeper than any battle ever could. For the first time in a long while, Lucas believed that the future was theirs to shape, and with that belief he stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The end was only the beginning. The ruins of Cinerafiv stretched across the horizon like the broken bones of a long-dead giant. Cracked spires jutted from the scorched earth, remnants of a once-thriving colony that had been ground to dust under the weight of the intergalactic war. Smoke lingered in the air, clinging to Ceres's throat like a phantom hand, while the twin moons cast their pale light on the battlefield below. The silence was unnatural, thick with a tension that made even seasoned warriors like her uneasy. Ceres crouched low behind the jagged remains of a ferrocrete wall, her violet eyes scanning the shadows. The HUD inside her helmet flickered with erratic readouts, a reminder of the damage her suit had sustained during the last skirmish. She adjusted the grip on her plasma spear, its faint hum reassuring against the oppressive quiet. Somewhere behind her, her squad moved in disciplined formation, their footfalls barely audible over the whisper of the wind. "This isn't right," she murmured, her voice distorted by the comms. "No signs of movement," came the reply from Raylith, her second in command. "The humans withdrew hours ago. Scanners are clear." Ceres didn't respond. The battlefield told a different story. There were too many signs, scorch marks that didn't align with standard tactics, abandoned weaponry that bore no insignias, and the peculiar way the bodies had been left behind. The coalition was ruthless, yes, but they were also meticulous. They didn't leave their dead in the open, and they certainly didn't retreat without cause. She activated the tactical overlay on her visor, overlaying the terrain with a faint grid. No heat signatures, no movement, nothing. Yet the unease gnawed at her, a primal instinct she had learned to trust. "Advance slowly," she ordered. Her voice was steel now, cutting through any doubt. "Weapons at the ready. If anything moves, kill it." The squad fanned out, their formations tight and deliberate. Ceres followed, her boots crunching softly on the charred ground. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against her back. It wasn't long before they reached the epicenter of the skirmish. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, and the shadows seemed deeper, as if they resisted the moon's light. Cerys knelt beside a body, Theryx judging by the taloned hands and the deep azure of his blood. The wound was precise, a single puncture to the chest. Not a coalition energy blade, though. The edges were too clean. "What is it?" Raylath's voice crackled in her ear. "Something efficient," she replied, rising to her feet. "Efficient?" Her answer was cut short as a sound shattered the silence, a faint, mechanical whir, barely audible but unmistakable. Cerys froze. Her spear raised and her squad followed suit. The sound came again, this time closer, like the breath of a machine exhaling in the dark. "Defensive positions!" she barked, her heart pounding. The squad moved in unison, forming a circle with their weapons pointed outward. The shadows shifted, and for a moment, Cerys thought she saw something. A flicker of movement, there and gone. "Scanners still show nothing," Raylath hissed, his usual calm fraying at the edges. "Trust your eyes, not your tech," Cerys snapped, her gaze darting between the looming structures. The attack came without warning. A blur of motion erupted from the darkness, faster than Cerys could track. One of her soldiers screamed, a wet gurgling sound as a jagged blade pierced his armor. The thing, whatever it was, moved with inhuman speed, striking again before the squad could react. Cerys caught a glimpse of it. A sleek, metallic form, its limbs impossibly long and jointed wrong. It wasn't coalition. It wasn't Theryx. "Fire!" Plasma bolts lit up the night, carving streaks of light through the air. The creature darted between them, a shadow slipping through the cracks of their formation. It wasn't just fast, it was calculating. Each movement was precise, each attack devastating. Cerys lunged, her spear aimed for its core. The weapon connected, the plasma crackling as it burned through synthetic flesh. The creature recoiled, a metallic shriek escaping its twisted frame, but it wasn't enough. It twisted away, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. "Report!" Cerys shouted, spinning to assess the damage. 2 of her squad were down, their bodies still. Raylath staggered, clutching a wound on his side, his blood pooling at his feet. "What the void was that?" he rasped, his voice trembling. Cerys didn't answer. She was staring at the spot where the creature had disappeared, her mind racing. This wasn't a random ambush. It was deliberate, targeted. But why here? And why against them? The whirring sound returned, louder now, and Cerys felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. This wasn't over. Before she could issue another command, the creature lunged again. But this time it wasn't alone. Shadows peeled away from the ruins, revealing more of the mechanical horrors, their glowing eyes fixed on the surviving Theryx. Cerys braced herself, raising her spear for what she knew would be her last stand. The squad was outnumbered, outmatched, and the enemy was relentless. Yet even as the creatures closed in, a strange calm washed over her. If this was how she was to die, she would face it with honor. But fate had other plans. A sudden roar echoed through the ruins, deep, guttural, and unmistakably human. A figure appeared, moving with the same speed and precision as the creatures themselves. Plasma bolts erupted from his weapon, striking true. One by one, the mechanical horrors fell, their bodies collapsing in showers of sparks. Cerys could only stare as the man turned toward her, his face partially obscured by the visor of his coalition helmet. His voice, calm but edged with urgency, broke through the haze of her disbelief. "Get up," he said, extending a hand. "You're not dying here." And for the first time in her life, Cerys felt the impossible sensation of trust in a human. Cerys awoke to a throbbing pain that radiated from her side, her body stiff as if it had been encased in stone. Her first instinct was to reach for her spear, but her hand met nothing but the thin material of a blanket. The air around her was alien, too warm, too still, and heavy with the faint scent of antiseptics. Slowly, her senses returned, and with them, the disorienting realization that she was no longer on the battlefield. She sat up, her muscles screaming in protest, and took in her surroundings. The room was small, dimly lit by a single overhead panel that buzzed faintly. The walls were smooth and sterile, painted a neutral gray that seemed to sap the life from everything within it. A bed, a chair, and a monitoring device were the only furnishings. It was unmistakably human. The door hissed open, and Saris tensed, her talons itching for a weapon. But it wasn't an enemy that entered. It was him, the human soldier from the battlefield. He carried a tray of supplies, his movements deliberate and careful. His armor was gone, replaced by a plain uniform that did little to mask the powerful frame beneath. His dark hair was damp, curling slightly at the edges, and his face bore the faint traces of exhaustion, a shadow of stubble, the tightness around his eyes. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm but watchful. He set the tray down on the chair and met her gaze. "How are you feeling?" Saris didn't answer. Her mind was racing, piecing together fragments of memory. The ambush, the creatures, the battle. This man had saved her more than once, it seemed, but why? Humans didn't save Therix. They killed them. "I know this is unexpected," he continued when her silence stretched. "But you're safe here. For now." "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough but steady. "Forward Operating Base Theta," he replied. "Coalition territory. Don't worry, no one else knows you're here." The words were meant to reassure, but they only sharpened her suspicion. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her strength. Her body protested, but she ignored it. Why? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusing. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "Because you would have died out there," he said simply, "and I couldn't let that happen. You're my enemy." His lips quirked in a wry smile. "Doesn't mean I want you dead." Saris narrowed her eyes, studying him. His calm demeanor, his steady gaze, none of it made sense. Humans were supposed to be brash, impulsive, consumed by their hunger for conquest. This man was different. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Ethan. Ethan Cole." She repeated the name in her mind, rolling it over like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. "You risked your life to save me. Twice. Why?" Ethan's gaze flickered, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes. A shadow of regret, or perhaps guilt. "Let's just say I've seen enough death in this war. If I can prevent even a little of it, I will." Before she could press further, the door opened again, and a second human entered. A woman with sharp features and a clipboard in hand. Her eyes widened when she saw Saris, her hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm at her hip. "She's awake?" the woman hissed, her voice low but urgent. "It's fine, Lieutenant," Ethan said, stepping between them. "Fine?" The woman's voice rose. "Do you have any idea what you've done? If Command finds out—" "They won't," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm. The tension between them was palpable, and Saris watched silently, noting the way the woman's hand hovered near her weapon, the way Ethan's shoulders tensed, as if ready to shield her again. "This is insane," the woman muttered, lowering her hand but not her guard. "She's the enemy, Cole. You're risking everything for someone who didn't deserve to die," Ethan finished, his voice soft but unyielding. The lieutenant's gaze darted to Saris, her expression a mixture of fear and anger. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Ethan admitted, "but I know enough to trust my instincts." The lieutenant shook her head, muttering under her breath as she left the room, the door hissing shut behind her. "Your people are divided," Saris observed, her tone neutral. Ethan chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "You could say that." Saris stood, her legs shaky but steady enough. "What happens now?" "Now," Ethan said, his gaze meeting hers, We figure out why those things were hunting you." The words sent a chill down her spine. The creatures, the sleek, mechanical nightmares, flashed through her mind. They weren't human, they weren't Therics, and they had been deliberate in their attack. "You saw them," she said, her voice quieter now. Ethan nodded. "I've seen a lot of things in this war, but nothing like that. They weren't coalition, at least not officially." "What do you mean, not officially?" He hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell her. "Let's just say there are factions within the coalition. Not everyone plays by the same rules." The implications were staggering. If the coalition was splintering, it meant chaos on a scale even the Therics couldn't have anticipated. But there was something more pressing, more immediate. "Why target me?" she asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But whatever the reason, it's not over. You need to recover, and we need to stay ahead of them." Cirrus frowned, her instincts screaming at her to leave, to escape this human base and return to her people. But something held her back, a gnawing curiosity, a sense that Ethan was telling the truth. And beneath it all, a deeper, more unsettling question. What if the real enemy wasn't human? The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of the monitoring device. Cirrus sat back down, her mind a storm of thoughts. "Rest," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "You'll need your strength." As he left the room, Cirrus closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. The mysteries surrounded her like the smoke on Cinderefo, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure who, or what, she was truly fighting. The narrow corridors of Forward Operating Base, Theta hummed with the faint energy of machinery and the subdued murmur of distant voices. Cirrus moved through the human stronghold like a ghost, her talons clicking softly against the metal floor. Ethan walked ahead of her, his frame casting long shadows under the flickering overhead lights. The tension between them was palpable. Cirrus, a Therics warrior accustomed to the sharp clarity of battle, felt the weight of unfamiliar questions pressing on her shoulders. The creatures that had ambushed her squad, the schism Ethan hinted at within the coalition, and now her own tenuous place in this alien fortress, it all churned in her mind like a storm. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "You'll see. Trust me." Trust. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Therics culture prized loyalty, but it was earned through blood and battle, not casual assurances. Still, something in Ethan's demeanor, his unwavering steadiness, kept her from outright refusing. They arrived at a locked door, its surface unmarred save for a small biometric scanner. Ethan pressed his hand against it, and with a soft hiss the door slid open, revealing a darkened room beyond. "After you," he said, stepping aside. Cirrus hesitated, her instincts flaring. But curiosity won out, and she stepped inside. The lights flickered to life, illuminating a space filled with holographic displays, scattered datapads, and a large central table covered in charts and schematics. "What is this?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the room. Ethan closed the door behind them. "The truth, or at least part of it." He moved to the central table, activating one of the holograms. A map of the galaxy sprang to life, dotted with glowing markers. Red for coalition territories, blue for Therics-controlled space, and a third color, pale silver, marking areas Cirrus didn't recognize. "These zones," Ethan said, gesturing to the silver markers. "Do you know what they are?" Cirrus shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "Number should I?" "They're ghost zones," he explained. "Regions where entire populations have disappeared. No signs of battle, no debris, nothing. Just silence." Her brow furrowed. The Therics had heard rumors of such places, hushed whispers among strategists and scouts. But they were dismissed as coalition propaganda or anomalies of war. Yet here, in this room, the evidence was undeniable. "Your people didn't share this with you?" Ethan asked, watching her carefully. "No," she admitted, her voice colder than she intended. "And why would they? We're at war. What happens in your territories is not our concern." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he activated another display. This one showed a series of fragmented images, grainy footage of mechanical creatures, their sleek forms moving with eerie precision. Cirrus recognized them immediately. "The things that attacked you," Ethan said. "They've been spotted in several of these ghost zones, but never this far into active war zones, until now." "Why?" she demanded, stepping closer to the display. "Why attack me? My squad?" "That's the question," Ethan replied, "and I think I might have part of the answer." He pulled up another file, this one a classified coalition document. Cirrus couldn't read the human text, but the holographic images were clear enough. Diagrams of the mechanical creatures, detailed schematics of their inner workings. "They're not alien," Ethan said quietly. "They're ours." The words struck like a thunderbolt. "Yours," she echoed, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You're saying humans made these things?" "Not all humans," Ethan clarified. "A faction, a shadow group within the coalition. They've been developing these machines in secret, claiming it's for the war effort, but their actions don't align with any sanctioned strategy." Cirrus stared at the schematics, her mind racing. The creatures were human-made, designed by the very enemy her people had fought for generations, but they didn't behave like human soldiers. They moved with cold efficiency, devoid of the chaos and emotion that characterized human warfare. "What's their purpose?" she asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Ethan said. "They're not just weapons. They're targeting specific individuals, disrupting key operations. It's almost as if—" He trailed off, his expression darkening. "As if what?" Cirrus pressed. "As if they're trying to destabilize both sides," he said finally, "pushing us toward something bigger, something neither the Coalition nor the Therics are prepared for." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the holograms. Cirrus crossed her arms, her mind churning. "Why tell me this? Why trust me?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression unflinching. "Because you've seen them. Because you survived. And because if we're going to stop this, we'll need to work together." The words hung in the air, a challenge and an offer in one. Cirrus felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Trusting a human went against everything she had been taught, everything she believed, but the evidence was undeniable and the implications were too great to ignore. Before she could respond, the room's comm system crackled to life. "Cole," a voice said, tense and hurried. "We've got movement near the perimeter. Unidentified contacts." Ethan stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his hip. "How many?" "4. No, 5. They're fast, and they're not broadcasting any signals." The description sent a chill through Cirrus. She didn't need to hear more to know what was coming. "They've found us," she said, her voice low but steady. Ethan nodded, already moving toward the door. "Then let's make sure they regret it." He tossed her a weapon, a compact plasma pistol, human-made but functional. Cirrus caught it easily, her grip firm despite the unfamiliar design. As they stepped into the corridor, the base's alarm blared to life, its piercing wail echoing through the metal halls. Soldiers scrambled into defensive positions, their faces pale with fear. Cirrus tightened her grip on the pistol, her warrior instinct surging to the forefront. The mechanical creatures were here, and the stakes had never been higher. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting for her people or her honor. She was fighting for answers, and for survival. The air around forward operating base Theta was thick with the hum of tension, the oppressive weight of an enemy unseen. Cirrus stood beside Ethan at the edge of the central command room, the faint glow of holographic maps flickering over their faces. The alarms had quieted, but the silence that followed was far more ominous. "They've breached the outer perimeter," a soldier called out, her voice tight with panic. "Defenses are holding, but it's only a matter of time." Ethan leaned over the console, his face set in grim determination. "Redirect power to the turrets. Lock down the southern corridor." As commands flew, and the room buzzed with frantic energy. Saris remained still, her gaze fixed on the door. The mechanical creatures were coming. She could feel it, a cold certainty crawling through her veins. Saris! Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to him, meeting his steady gaze. "They're after you," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "We both know it." She nodded. There was no point in denying it. The ambush on the battlefield, the pursuit to this base, it was all too deliberate. "Then let me face them," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. "I won't cower while others die for me." Ethan shook his head. "It's not that simple. If they take you, whatever they're planning, it escalates. We can't let that happen." "You think I'll let them take me?" Her tone was sharp, the faintest flicker of offense flashing in her eyes. "I think," Ethan said, stepping closer, "that you don't fully understand what we're up against." Before she could respond, a loud crack echoed through the base, a sound that wasn't quite mechanical nor entirely organic. It sent a ripple of dread through the room. The soldiers froze, their hands tightening on their weapons. "They're inside," someone whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Saris, come with me." She hesitated, but the urgency in his voice left no room for argument. Together, they moved quickly through the winding corridors, past soldiers setting up barricades and engineers frantically rerouting power. The base felt like a fortress on the edge of collapse, its heart racing against an inevitable fate. Ethan led her to a small, heavily secured room deep within the base. Inside was a terminal surrounded by scattered documents and holographic projections. "This," he said, motioning to the terminal, "is what they don't want you to see." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes scanning the display. It was filled with data, schematics, intercepted communications, and fragmented reports. "What is this?" she asked. "Evidence," Ethan said. "Proof that these machines aren't just rogue weapons. They're part of a larger plan, something that ties the Coalition, the Therics, and these ghost zones together." He tapped a few keys, and a video feed appeared. It was grainy, distorted, but the imagery was clear enough. A massive factory, its cavernous interior filled with the mechanical creatures in various stages of assembly. Saris frowned. "That's not human technology, and it's not Therics either." "Exactly," Ethan said. "This isn't a war between our species anymore. It's something bigger, something orchestrated." The word hung heavy in the air. "Who's behind this?" Saris demanded, her voice rising. "What do they want?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his frustration evident. "But whoever they are, they've been manipulating us, using this war as a smokescreen to consolidate power." Saris felt a cold chill run down her spine. Her people, her entire life, had been forged in the fires of this war. To think it was all part of some larger design, a mere pawn in a game she couldn't yet see, was almost too much to bear. Before she could speak, the terminal beeped, and an automated voice filled the room. "Hostile entities detected. Main power grid compromised." The lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. "They're cutting off our systems," Ethan said, his voice grim. "We're running out of time." The first attack came suddenly, a blur of motion that shattered the reinforced door like it was paper. Saris reacted instinctively, raising her plasma pistol and firing in one fluid motion. The shot struck one of the creatures, a sleek quadrupedal machine with razor-like appendages, square in its core, sending it crashing to the floor. But more followed. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the room. "This way!" They sprinted down a narrow maintenance corridor, the sounds of the battle behind them echoing like thunder. The creatures were relentless, their pursuit unyielding. "What's the plan?" Saris shouted over the chaos. "We get to the main reactor," Ethan said. "If we can overload it, we might be able to take them out in one strike." "And us along with them?" Ethan glanced at her, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Only if we're unlucky." Despite the dire situation, Saris found herself grinning. His audacity was infuriating and oddly comforting. The reactor room was a maze of pipes and control panels, its core glowing with a faint, pulsing light. Ethan moved quickly, accessing the terminal and inputting a series of commands. Saris stood guard, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The creatures were unnervingly quiet, their silence more menacing than the clamor of their attack. "Almost there," Ethan muttered. A sudden noise, a sharp, metallic scrape, sent Saris spinning around, her weapon raised. A single creature emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and fluid, as if it were adapting to its environment. This one was different. "Ethan," Saris called, her voice low but urgent. He glanced up, his expression hardening when he saw the creature. "Stall it. I just need another minute." The creature lunged faster than any of its predecessors. Saris dove to the side, firing as she moved, but its agility was unmatched. It closed the distance in seconds, its claws slashing through the air. She fought with everything she had, her training and instincts guiding her movements. But the creature was relentless, its attacks forcing her back toward the reactor's edge. "Saris!" Ethan shouted, his tone laced with panic. In that moment, she made a choice. With a fierce cry, she lunged forward, using the creature's momentum against it. Her talons dug into its core, and with a burst of strength, she hurled it into the reactor. The impact was immediate. The core flared with blinding light, and the room shook with the force of the explosion. Ethan grabbed her, pulling her toward the emergency exit as the reactor went critical. They stumbled into the corridor, the blast wave throwing them to the ground. As the world around them shook, Saris realized something profound. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the truth. The blast wave from the reactor's explosion had subsided, leaving behind a vacuum of silence that felt almost deafening. Saris lay sprawled on the cold floor of the corridor, her body aching from the force of the impact. Smoke and ash hung thick in the air, the acrid scent mingling with the faint hum of the base's backup systems, struggling to stabilize. She groaned, her talons scraping against the metal as she pushed herself up. Beside her, Ethan stirred, coughing as he wiped soot from his face. His uniform was torn, a jagged cut along his temple leaking a thin trickle of blood, but he was alive. "You good?" he asked hoarsely, his voice strained but steady. Saris nodded, her breath uneven. "I'll survive." Ethan's lips quirked into a faint smile. "That's the spirit." They both turned their attention to the reactor room, or what was left of it. The explosion had annihilated the pursuing creatures, their charred remnants scattered amidst the wreckage. But the damage had taken its toll. The base's power was failing, and the distant rumble of structural instability hinted at a ticking clock they couldn't ignore. "We need to move," Ethan said, rising to his feet and offering her a hand. Saris hesitated for a moment before taking it, the small gesture of trust grounding her amidst the chaos. The journey through the base was harrowing. With the power grid compromised, the corridors were bathed in dim emergency lighting, casting long shadows that danced with eerie unpredictability. Every creak of metal or distant sound made Saris's muscles tense, her warrior instincts on high alert. They passed soldiers tending to the wounded, their faces pale and drawn. The mechanical creatures had been relentless, cutting through defenses with ruthless efficiency. But they were gone now, destroyed by the explosion. For the first time since the attack began, the base felt eerily quiet. As they reached the central command room, Ethan halted, his hand resting on the edge of the doorway. "This is it," he said softly. Saris stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the remaining personnel. A handful of officers huddled around a flickering console, their voices low and hurried. Maps and data feeds displayed fractured images of the battlefield beyond the base, showing signs of retreat from both human and Therix forces. "What's the situation?" Ethan asked, his voice cutting through the tension. One of the officers turned, his face grim. "The enemies pulled back. Whatever those things were, they weren't interested in wiping us out, just destabilizing us." "And the coalition?" Ethan pressed, The officer hesitated, then sighed. Fractured. Commands in disarray. Whatever shadow faction was behind this, they've done enough damage to keep us off balance for weeks, maybe longer. Saris frowned, stepping closer to the console. And the Therics? Another officer, a young woman with a streak of soot across her cheek, glanced at her warily before answering. Similar reports. Their forces are regrouping, but their leadership seems shaken. It was a sobering realization. Both sides had been wounded, not by each other, but by an enemy neither had truly understood. Hours passed in a blur of tense conversations and strategic planning. Saris and Ethan worked side by side, piecing together what they could from the fragmented data. The factory from the video feed, the ghost zones, the mechanical creatures, it all pointed to a deliberate attempt to destabilize the galaxy's balance of power. This isn't just about war, Ethan said, his brow furrowed as he studied the schematics. It's about control. Whoever's behind this, they're playing a long game. Saris nodded, her expression grim. And they're winning. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them, heavy and unrelenting. But amidst the despair, there was a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread that tethered them to the possibility of resistance. We need to expose them, Saris said firmly, to both our people. If the Coalition and the Therics see the truth, they might turn against the real enemy, Ethan finished, his eyes meeting hers. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got. The next steps were painstaking. Saris and Ethan compiled everything they had, the intercepted communications, the schematics, the video feeds. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, but it was enough to paint a picture of manipulation, betrayal, and a threat that transcended species. Distributing the information was no small task. Saris used what remained of the Therics communication network to transmit the data to her people's command, embedding it with a personal message that bore her warrior's sigil, a symbol of honor that could not be ignored. Ethan did the same on the human side, leveraging his connections within the Coalition to ensure the information reached those who could make a difference. As they worked, Saris couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. "You're different from the other humans I've encountered," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of grudging respect. Ethan chuckled, though it was tinged with weariness. "And you're not what I expected from a Therics warrior." She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing at her lips. "Is that a compliment?" "Depends," he replied, a flicker of warmth in his tone. For a moment, the weight of their circumstances lifted, replaced by a fragile camaraderie that felt hard-won and deeply earned. When the transmissions were sent, there was nothing left to do but wait. Saris and Ethan stood on the base's observation deck, staring out at the stars beyond. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, stretched out before them, a reminder of both the fragility and resilience of life. "What now?" Saris asked, her voice softer than usual. Ethan leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "Now we see if anyone listens. And if they don't?" He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Then we keep fighting." Saris nodded, her gaze returning to the stars. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice. But for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond her people's war, a purpose that bound her to Ethan and the fragile hope they had kindled together. In the quiet of the storm's aftermath, they stood side by side, united not by blood or duty, but by something far more enduring: hope.